The year is 1886. In a quiet German town, a man ignites a machine that will change the course of human history. It rattles, smokes, and coughs to life, awkward and fragile, yet alive. For the first time, the world witnesses a horseless carriage. The man's name is Karl Benz, and with his patent motor wagon, he unknowingly invents what we now call the automobile. At the same time, just over 100 miles away, another dreamer named Gottlieb Daimler, alongside his trusted engineer Wilhelm Maybach, is building a high-speed engine destined to power everything from carriages to boats. Two men, working in parallel without knowledge of each other, yet both pushing toward the same audacious goal: to free mankind from the horse and give speed, freedom, and power to the open road. This is not just the story of a car company. This is the story of how human ingenuity created a brand that would outlast wars, revolutions, and competitors. A brand that, for over a century, has embodied luxury, power, and innovation. Mercedes-Benz. Think of the cars that have carried world leaders, kings, and celebrities. The sleek curves of the 300 SL Gullwing soaring into history as the first true supercar. The unstoppable G-Class, conquering deserts and mountains. The S-Class, the gold standard for safety and luxury, setting benchmarks every rival still chases. And the roar of silver racing machines, the silver arrows, dominating the racetracks. From Juan Manuel Fangio's glory days to Lewis Hamilton's modern-era Formula One dominance. But the road to glory was never smooth. It was paved with financial ruin, bitter rivalries, 2 world wars, and the near destruction of German industry itself. Karl Benz was mocked for his invention. Gottlieb Daimler struggled to find believers in his dream. Their companies fought against each other before realizing that survival meant unity. Out of hardship was born not just a brand, but a symbol, a 3-pointed star representing domination of land, sea, and air. To understand Mercedes-Benz is to understand the history of the automobile itself. Without Karl Benz, there is no car. Without Daimler, there is no engine revolution. Without Mercedes, the very idea of luxury and performance blended into one machine might never have existed. From Bertha Benz' daring 66-mile journey, proving the motor wagon worth when no man believed, to the glamorous Hollywood driveways of Beverly Hills where the S-Class became the must-have status symbol, Mercedes-Benz has shaped not only how we travel, but how we dream. This is a story of visionaries who turned ridicule into revolution. Of machines that became more than transportation, they became cultural icons. A story of how a humble, sputtering invention in 1886 grew into a dynasty that continues to lead the automotive world nearly 140 years later. This is the cinematic saga of Mercedes-Benz, the inventors of the automobile, the keepers of innovation, and the champions of the road and racetrack. When we speak about Mercedes-Benz today, the images that often come to mind are of sleek sedans gliding down highways, powerful AMG engines roaring across racetracks, or dignified limousines carrying presidents and dignitaries. But behind the prestige and the polished chrome lies a human story, a story rooted in the ambitions, struggles, and relentless determination of 2 visionaries, Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler. To understand Mercedes-Benz, we must first step back into 19th century Germany, a time of rapid industrial change. Railroads were connecting cities, steam engines powered factories, and electricity was beginning to reshape daily life. Yet transportation for the average citizen remained stubbornly tied to the horse. Streets were filled with carriages and wagons, their speed limited, their range restricted, their upkeep costly. The world was ready for change, but few could imagine what form that change would take. Karl Benz, a boy with a vision. Karl Benz was born in 1844 in the city of Mühlberg, which later became part of Karlsruhe in southwest Germany. His childhood was marked by hardship. His father, a railway worker, died of pneumonia when Karl was just 2 years old, leaving his mother to raise him alone. Despite poverty, his mother recognized his talent for mechanics and encouraged his education. By the astonishing age of 15, Karl was admitted to the Polytechnic School of Karlsruhe to study mechanical engineering, making him one of the youngest engineering students in history. Karl's early career was filled with relentless experimentation. He apprenticed as a mechanical engineer, showing remarkable skill in designing engines. Yet his true obsession was not with machines that stayed rooted in factories, but with creating a self-propelled vehicle, a carriage that did not need horses. The idea was radical, bordering on madness to many in his era. Still, Karl pressed forward, even when investors doubted him and society ridiculed his ambitions. Gottlieb Daimler, the engineer of speed. While Karl Benz was pursuing his vision in Karlsruhe, another boy with a passion for machines was growing up in Schorndorf, near Stuttgart. Born in 1834, Gottlieb Daimler was 10 years Karl's senior, and his journey also began in modest circumstances. Daimler trained as a gunsmith before studying mechanical engineering in Stuttgart. His brilliance caught the eye of employers, and soon he was traveling across Europe, gaining invaluable technical experience. But Daimler was not content with existing technology. He dreamed of building compact, high-speed internal combustion engines, machines that could power more than just factories. He believed the future lay in creating engines light enough and fast enough to power vehicles, boats, and even airships. With his brilliant partner, Wilhelm Maybach, Daimler would go on to design engines that were revolutionary for their time, engines that became the beating heart of early automobiles. Two paths, one destiny. The striking part of this story is how Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler worked independently, unaware of each other's progress, yet both pursued the same dream, to liberate humanity from the limits of the horse. Benz, with his practical vision of a horseless carriage, focused on building an integrated vehicle, designing the chassis and engine as one. Daimler, meanwhile, concentrated on the engine itself, a high-revving power source that could be fitted into a variety of machines. In 1886, their paths converged, though not in person. That year, Karl Benz patented the Benz patent motor wagon, the world's first true automobile designed from the ground up. At the same time, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach were mounting their compact engine into a horse carriage, effectively creating a motorized wagon of their own. Two inventors, two workshops, 1 year, and the birth of the automobile. The spirit of an era. It is difficult today to grasp how shocking these inventions seemed to people of the 19th century. Imagine living in a time when streets were dominated by horses and carriages, and suddenly strange contraptions appeared. No horses in sight, yet somehow moving with a mysterious mechanical power. For many, it was frightening. Critics dismissed the horseless carriage as impractical, noisy, even dangerous. Investors wavered, and ordinary people laughed. But visionaries rarely follow the crowd. Both Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler pushed forward, driven not by acceptance, but by conviction. Their families, too, played critical roles. Bertha Benz, Karl's wife, would soon prove to the world that his machine could work in real life, while Daimler relied on the loyalty and genius of Wilhelm Maybach to refine his engines. The road ahead. The seeds planted by these pioneers would not only create two separate companies, Benz and Kai, and Daimler Motorengesellschaft, DMG, but would eventually merge into a single entity, Mercedes-Benz. That merger, however, lay decades ahead, forged through hardship, rivalry, and necessity. The legacy of Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler is not merely mechanical, it is human. It is about believing in something before the world does. It is about enduring laughter, financial ruin, and endless nights in the workshop, fueled only by the fire of invention. It is about laying the foundation for one of the most iconic brands in history, a brand whose very name would become synonymous with the automobile itself. Before we can understand the rise of Mercedes-Benz as a global icon of luxury and innovation, we must first travel back into the lives of these two men, into their experiments, their failures, and their first creations. Because to tell the story of Mercedes-Benz is to tell the story of the birth of the car itself. The vision of a self-propelled vehicle may seem obvious to us today, but in the mid-19th century, it was almost unthinkable. Steam engines were powering trains and ships, but the idea of creating something small and practical enough to replace the horse-drawn carriage seemed impossible. To Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler, however, impossibility was simply the starting point. Karl Benz's first experiments. After completing his studies, Karl Benz joined a mechanical engineering company before co-founding his own workshop at the age of just 21. With the help of Bertha Benz A.S. Dowry, Karl launched Benz & Cie, a mechanical engineering firm in Mannheim, Germany. Initially, the company produced stationary gas-powered engines for factories. While profitable, Karl was restless. His heart was not in industrial machinery. It was in creating a new form of transportation. In 1871, Benz began working obsessively on a two-stroke gas engine. At the time, engines were massive, slow, and ill-suited for vehicles. His first prototypes often misfired, broke down, or refused to start altogether. His investors were skeptical, urging him to abandon what seemed like a fantasy project. Yet Karl persisted, pouring his time and energy into creating a compact engine that could power a vehicle. Failure was a constant companion. Components cracked under stress. Fuel mixtures refused to ignite consistently. Even when the engine did run, it lacked the efficiency Karl envisioned. Colleagues and investors whispered doubts. Was Karl wasting valuable resources on a machine nobody wanted? But Karl believed the world needed more than just improved engines. It needed a revolution in mobility. Bertha Benz, silent partner, steadfast support. Behind Karl's relentless drive stood Bertha Benz, his wife and most trusted supporter. Bertha was not just a passive partner, she was deeply involved in his work. While Karl wrestled with mechanical designs, Bertha encouraged him, often shielding him from financial pressures and doubts voiced by outsiders. It was Bertha's unwavering belief that gave Karl the courage to keep pushing forward despite repeated setbacks. In a time when women were rarely acknowledged in business or technology, Bertha's role was pivotal. She became both Karl's financier and his moral compass. Without her, the story of Mercedes-Benz might never have begun. Gottlieb Daimler's Workshop of Dreams. Meanwhile, in Stuttgart, Gottlieb Daimler was on his own parallel path. After years of working in machine manufacturing, Daimler teamed up with Wilhelm Maybach, a brilliant engineer whose creativity matched Daimler's ambition. Together, they established a workshop in a converted greenhouse at Daimler's home. To outsiders, it looked like a hobby project. To Daimler and Maybach, it was the birthplace of the future. Their goal was clear: build a lightweight, high-speed internal combustion engine. Existing engines were designed for factories, slow and cumbersome. Daimler wanted an engine that could fit inside a carriage or even be adapted for boats and airships. In 1883, they developed a prototype engine nicknamed the Grandfather Clock because of its upright cylinder and pendulum-like appearance. The Grandfather Clock was a marvel of its time. Small, relatively light, and capable of running at speeds unthinkable for the era, it represented a leap forward. Yet the road to this invention was littered with failures. Early models overheated, seized, or vibrated violently. Materials of the time were not always strong enough to handle the forces involved. Daimler and Maybach worked tirelessly, often late into the night, refining designs and testing components. The world says no. Both Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler faced ridicule from their contemporaries. For most people in the 1870s and 1880s, the horse was reliable, familiar, and essential. Why replace it? Steam engines already powered trains for long-distance travel, and bicycles offered personal mobility. The idea of a noisy, smelly mechanical contraption replacing a horse carriage seemed absurd. Investors were wary, townspeople mocked, newspapers scoffed. Karl Benz in particular became the subject of jokes, his strange contraptions sputtering down Mannheim. Streets were seen as eccentric toys, not serious innovations. Daimler and Maybach, too, found it difficult to attract consistent funding. Their engines worked in principle but required constant refinement, and skeptics questioned whether such devices would ever become practical. Yet it is in these moments of rejection that true pioneers are forged. Where others saw impossibility, Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler saw destiny. Engineering obstacles. One of the greatest challenges facing both men was fuel and ignition technology. Gasoline was not yet widely available, and carburetors were still in their infancy. Early engines often struggled to deliver a consistent fuel-air mixture, leading to misfires and inefficiency. Ignition systems, spark plugs and magnetos were unreliable, forcing endless trial and error. Vibration was another problem. Engines of the time shook violently, threatening to tear apart the carriages they powered. Materials science was not yet advanced enough to provide lightweight yet durable components. Bearings failed, gears wore down, and pistons cracked. Each problem forced new innovations, each failure bringing the inventors closer to a workable solution. The weight of failure. For Karl Benz, the emotional toll was immense. Investors frequently demanded he abandon his horseless carriage experiments and focus on proven products. Financial struggles loomed large, and ridicule from the public stung deeply. At times, even Karl himself doubted whether his dream would ever succeed. Gottlieb Daimler faced similar pressures. His partnership with Maybach was one of brilliant minds working against the odds, but funds were scarce and patience was thin. Daimler's insistence on pushing for lighter, faster engines often clashed with the practicality of the era. Many believed he was chasing a fantasy, and yet both men refused to quit. They endured the weight of failure, the sting of mockery, and the crushing pressure of financial risk, all for the chance to bring their vision to life. The stage is set. By the early 1880s, both Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler had developed engines that, while imperfect, were unlike anything the world had seen. Benz was preparing to integrate his compact engine into a purpose-built vehicle, while Daimler and Maybach were refining their grandfather clock engine for broader applications. The world was about to change forever. What began as failed prototypes and mocked experiments was on the verge of becoming the most transformative invention in human history. And though Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler still did not know it, their separate paths were moving steadily toward the same destiny: the birth of the automobile. By the mid-1880s, Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler had each taken bold steps in their quests to bring a new kind of transportation into existence. Years of tinkering, failure, and financial pressure had not broken them. Instead, it pushed them toward breakthroughs that would become cornerstones of automotive history. Karl Benz and the patent motor wagon. In 1885, Karl Benz unveiled what is widely recognized as the world's first purpose-built automobile, the Benz patent motor wagon. Unlike Daimler, who focused on engines adaptable to various vehicles, Benz designed his machine from the ground up as a self-propelled carriage. The motor wagon was a strange sight. Built on a lightweight, tubular steel frame, it rolled on 3 spoked wheels, 2 large ones at the rear, and a smaller one at the front for steering. Its heart was a 954cc single-cylinder, 4-stroke engine, producing less than 1 horsepower. By modern standards, it was laughably weak. But in 1886, it was revolutionary. The motor wagon could reach a top speed of about 16 km/h, 10 mph, fast enough to turn heads, and faster than most people had ever traveled outside of a train. Karl's design was not just about the engine. He created an integrated vehicle where the chassis and powertrain worked together. The motor wagon had a water-cooled engine, chain drive to the rear wheels, and a primitive carburetor to manage fuel. It was noisy, temperamental, and prone to breakdowns, but it was also alive, an invention unlike anything the world had ever seen. On January 29, 1886, Karl Benz filed a patent for his creation. Patent number 37435. History would remember this as the official birth certificate of the automobile, a world of skeptics. But a patent alone could not silence the skeptics. To the people of Mannheim, Karl's three-wheeled contraption was more curiosity than miracle. It rattled through the streets, sputtering and smoking, often stalling in front of jeering crowds. Few saw it as a practical invention, and investors remained cautious. Karl's shy personality didn't help. He was a gifted engineer, but not a natural salesman. He believed his invention could change the world, but convincing others proved far more difficult. The motor wagon risked being dismissed as a bizarre experiment, destined to fade into obscurity. It was here that Bertha Benz stepped into history. Bertha Benz's legendary journey. In 1888, without telling her husband, Bertha Benz took the third version of the motor wagon and embarked on a daring journey from Mannheim to her mother S house in Pforzheim, a distance of about 66 miles, 106 kilometers. Armed with only a small amount of fuel, Bertha set out with her two teenage sons. Along the way, she stopped at a pharmacy in Wieslach to buy Legroin, a type of petroleum used as fuel, making it the first gas station in history. She also performed roadside repairs herself, using her hatpin to unclog a fuel line and her garter to insulate a wire. When the wooden brakes wore down, she convinced a shoemaker to nail leather onto them, inventing the concept of brake pads. Her journey took nearly 15 hours, but when Bertha arrived in Pforzheim, she proved what Karl could not, that the motor wagon was not just a noisy toy. It was a practical means of long-distance travel. Newspapers across Germany reported on her bold adventure, and public perception began to shift. Bertha Benz had not only demonstrated the machine's potential, she had also shown its resilience and necessity. Today, her route is celebrated as the Bertha Benz Memorial Route, a living tribute to the woman who turned skepticism into belief. Gottlieb Daimler and the motorized carriage. While Karl Benz was patenting the motor wagon, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach were perfecting their own vision. Unlike Benz, Daimler did not focus on building a vehicle from scratch. Instead, he created an engine versatile enough to power a wide range of machines. In 1886, Daimler and Maybach installed their compact grandfather clock engine into a horse carriage, creating the world's first four-wheeled motorized vehicle. The engine was mounted beneath the carriage, making it appear almost indistinguishable from a traditional horse-drawn coach, except no horses were present. Later that year, Daimler expanded the scope of his experiments. He fitted his engine into a boat, creating the world's first motorboat, and even into a two-wheeled wooden frame, producing what many consider the first motorcycle. Daimler's genius was in envisioning the internal combustion engine not as a single invention, but as a universal power source that could transform multiple industries. Two visions, one invention. Though their approaches were different, the achievements of Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler in 1886 represent parallel breakthroughs in automotive history. Benz's patent motor wagon demonstrated the viability of a dedicated automobile, while Daimler's motorized carriage proved the adaptability of the internal combustion engine. Neither man knew of the other's success at the time. Working independently, they had each created a piece of the puzzle that would soon merge into one. The automobile was no longer a dream, it was a reality, and the race to refine, commercialize, and dominate this new industry had begun. Public reactions and challenges. Despite their triumphs, both inventors faced enormous challenges. Roads were poor, fuel was scarce, and infrastructure for these machines simply did not exist. Public opinion was slow to shift. Many continued to see automobiles as impractical novelties. For Karl Benz, the challenge was turning his invention into a product people would buy. Early motor wagons were expensive and delicate, built almost entirely by hand. For Daimler, the struggle was finding investors who believed in the future of his engines beyond niche applications. The skepticism was not entirely unfounded. Early vehicles were unreliable, prone to breakdowns, and difficult to operate. They were noisy, emitted strong odors, and frightened horses. But despite these hurdles, the momentum of progress was undeniable. Each improvement brought the automobile closer to mainstream acceptance. Seeds of a revolution. By the late 1880s, the world had witnessed its first true cars. Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler had taken humanity, or ES, first steps into the age of personal motorized transport. Their machines were crude by today's standards, but they sparked imaginations, inspired imitators, and attracted pioneers ready to join the new movement. What neither Benz nor Daimler could know was how their inventions would eventually collide, not in rivalry, but in unity. Two separate companies, born of different philosophies, would one day merge to create Mercedes-Benz, a brand destined to shape the course of automotive history. But before that, both men would face years of struggle, skepticism, and fierce competition. The journey from invention to industry would demand more than genius. It would demand perseverance against odds that often seemed insurmountable. By the late 1880s, the horse had met its rival. The horseless carriage, once mocked as an eccentric curiosity, was beginning to prove its worth. Yet the transition from invention to industry is never simple. For Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler, the next step meant building not only machines but entire companies, businesses capable of mass production, customer service, and global vision. Karl Benz and Benz & C. Karl Benz had already co-founded Benz & Cie, years earlier, in 1871, alongside his partner August Ritter. Initially, the company focused on stationary gas-powered engines. But after Karl's patenting of the motor wagon in 1886, the direction of the firm shifted dramatically. The dream was no longer about stationary engines in factories, it was about mobility, bringing the motor wagon to a wider audience. To expand, Karl needed investors. Manufacturing automobiles in the late 19th century was a costly endeavor. Each motor wagon required painstaking craftsmanship, and demand was still uncertain. Convincing wealthy backers to fund an unproven product was no easy task. Yet Karl's persistence paid off. Interest slowly grew among progressive thinkers and wealthy early adopters who saw potential in the horseless carriage. By the 1890s, Benz & Cie had begun offering several variations of the motor wagon, improving reliability and range. Word of Bertha Benz's famous journey had traveled far, giving the company credibility. Orders trickled in, not in the thousands, but enough to keep the dream alive. The company expanded production facilities in Mannheim, and Karl continued refining his designs. Still, Benz & Cie was far from a juggernaut. Competition was growing. Imitators were emerging across Europe, and Karl's cautious personality often clashed with the boldness needed to scale aggressively. It was a company led by a genius engineer, but one still struggling to balance invention with industry, Gottlieb Daimler and DMG. Meanwhile, Gottlieb Daimler, together with Wilhelm Maybach, had taken a different path. In 1890, Daimler co-founded Daimler Motorengesellschaft, DMG, in Cannstatt, near Stuttgart. DMG's mission was simple, yet ambitious. Build high-speed internal combustion engines and vehicles that could revolutionize transportation. Unlike Karl Benz, Daimler had a broader industrial vision. He and Maybach saw their engines not just in cars but in boats, trucks, and even flying machines. DMG quickly gained recognition for the versatility and reliability of its engines, which attracted attention from wealthy investors eager to capitalize on new technologies. The company's progress was remarkable. By the early 1890s, DMG had developed advanced multi-cylinder engines and was producing vehicles that were faster, sturdier, and more practical than many early rivals. While Benz had the honor of creating the first automobile, Daimler's company was rapidly outpacing him in terms of industrial growth and global ambition, early investors, and risks. Both Benz and G and DMG relied heavily on investors. At the time, automobiles were still seen as luxury novelties. Wealthy aristocrats, industrial magnates, and forward-thinking businessmen became the earliest customers and backers. The risk was enormous. No one knew if the automobile would truly replace the horse, or if it was merely a passing fad. Investors often dictated direction. At Benz and C, shareholders pressured Karl to modernize production and expand aggressively, sometimes against his conservative instincts. At DMG, investors pushed Daimler and Maybach to commercialize faster, resulting in friction between engineers and financiers. These tensions were part of a larger truth. Inventing the car was one thing, but building an automobile industry required compromise, vision, and scale. Both companies were learning this lesson in real time. The birth of the Mercedes. Name a turning point came at the dawn of the 20th century with the emergence of the Mercedes brand, which would eventually eclipse both Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler's individual names. The story begins with Emil Jelinek, an Austrian businessman and automobile dealer who became one of DMG's most influential clients. Jelinek was a wealthy entrepreneur with a passion for automobiles, and he believed DMG's cars had the potential to dominate the European market. However, he insisted on improvements: faster engines, more reliable handling, and modern styling. Jelinek became so invested in the success of DMG's vehicles that he entered them in automobile races, marketing them to Europe's elite. He demanded that DMG build him a new line of cars with advanced performance, and he requested that they bear a special name, Mercedes, after his young daughter. In 1901, DMG introduced the Mercedes 35 HP, a sleek, powerful automobile that many consider the first modern car. Unlike the upright, carriage-like vehicles of the 19th century, the Mercedes 35 HP featured a longer wheelbase, a lightweight design, and a 35-horsepower engine that could reach speeds unheard of at the time. It was a sensation, and it transformed DMG's reputation overnight. The Mercedes name quickly became synonymous with innovation and prestige. Soon, wealthy customers across Europe and beyond clamored for these new machines. Jelinek's gamble had paid off, and DMG had established not only a successful car, but a powerful new brand identity. Rivalry between Benz and Daimler. By the early 20th century, Benz and Key and DMG were two of the leading automobile manufacturers in Germany, but they were fierce rivals. Benz, proud of his title as the inventor of the automobile, watched as Daimler's company, powered by the Mercedes brand, began to surpass him in market share and prestige. Daimler's vehicles were winning races, breaking speed records, and attracting wealthy clients around the world. The rivalry was fueled not just by business competition, but by philosophical differences. Benz focused on steady, reliable vehicles built around his cautious engineering style. Daimler and Maybach, in contrast, embraced performance, speed, and daring innovation. Each company had its strengths, but together they represented two halves of what the modern automobile would become: expansion into factories and scale. As demand for automobiles grew in the early 1900s, both companies expanded their production capabilities. New factories were constructed, employing hundreds of workers. Assembly processes became more efficient, and suppliers for parts and components formed around these hubs of innovation. Still, production volumes were small compared to what would come later. Automobiles remained largely luxury items, accessible only to the wealthy, yet the groundwork was being laid for mass adoption. Roads were improving, fueling stations were emerging, and governments were beginning to see the potential of motor vehicles for commerce, military, and industry. Setting the stage for greatness. By the eve of World War I, both Benz and Side and DMG had established themselves as leaders in the young automotive industry. They had built companies capable of producing not just a handful of experimental machines, but a growing fleet of practical automobiles. The invention had become an industry, and yet challenges loomed. Financial pressures, global competition, and the coming storms of war would test both companies to their limits. Neither Karl Benz nor Gottlieb Daimler could have foreseen how their independent ventures would one day be forced to unite. But before the merger, before the birth of Mercedes-Benz as we know it, the companies would endure their darkest chapters, chapters filled with economic turmoil, political upheaval, and the devastating impact of two world wars. The history of Mercedes-Benz is not one of uninterrupted triumph. For every gleaming innovation and celebrated model, there are shadows of hardship, near bankruptcy, and the brutal hand of history. The early decades of the 20th century tested Karl Benz S and Gottlieb Daimler S companies in ways that no engineering manual could have predicted. These struggles, though painful, shaped the resilience of the brand that would one day become a global symbol of prestige and performance. Daimler's untimely death and DMG's crisis. In March of 1900, tragedy struck Daimler Motorengesellschaft, DMG. Gottlieb Daimler died suddenly at the age of 65, leaving behind a company at the forefront of automotive progress, but vulnerable without its visionary leader. Wilhelm Maybach, Daimler's closest collaborator and engineering genius, took over much of the technical direction, but Daimler's death shook investor confidence. For a time, DMG's board even forced Maybach out due to disagreements, a mistake that nearly crippled the company's engineering momentum. Though he eventually returned, thanks in part to Emil Jelinek's insistence, this episode revealed the fragility of even the most promising automotive enterprises. The release of the Mercedes 35 HP in 1901 saved DMG from collapse, but the underlying issue remained. The company was heavily dependent on a few wealthy clients, and its production scale was limited. Financial stability was precarious, and each downturn in the luxury market threatened disaster. Karl Benz and the slow road. Karl Benz faced his own set of challenges. While Benz and Sierre was respected for its role as the birthplace of the automobile, it was losing ground to rivals like DMG and French manufacturers such as Peugeot and Renault. Part of the problem was Karl's conservative engineering style. He hesitated to embrace riskier, high-performance designs, focusing instead on steady improvements and reliability. While this approach appealed to some, it left Benz and Sierre looking old-fashioned compared to the daring machines emerging from Stuttgart and Paris. Investors grew restless, demanding greater returns. Karl, now aging and less involved in the day-to-day innovation, gradually stepped back from leadership. By the early 1900s, Benz and Sierre was still a respected company, but it lacked the dynamism needed to dominate the automotive revolution. Competition and overproduction. As the 20th century progressed, competition intensified. Dozens of small manufacturers across Europe, and increasingly in the United States, were producing automobiles. The American automobile industry, led by Henry Ford, was pioneering mass production techniques that would soon outpace anything in Germany. Ford's Model T, introduced in 1908, was a revelation. Cheap, reliable, and mass-produced on assembly lines, it put millions of Americans behind the wheel. By contrast, Benz and Sierre and DMG remained focused on luxury and performance markets, producing far fewer vehicles at much higher costs. This market strategy gave them prestige, but also exposed them to financial vulnerability. When economic downturns hit, luxury car sales plummeted, leaving factories idle and workers unpaid. For both companies, overproduction during boom years followed by devastating slumps became a recurring nightmare. The First World War. Nothing, however, compared to the upheaval of World War I, 1914-1918. The conflict transformed the automobile industry overnight. Civilian production nearly ceased as factories shifted to military output. Both Benz and G and DMG were pressed into service, producing trucks, military vehicles, and aircraft engines for the German war effort. On one hand, the war kept factories busy and brought massive orders. On the other, it tethered both companies' survival to the fate of Germany itself. When the war ended in defeat, the repercussions were catastrophic. The Treaty of Versailles, 1919, imposed heavy restrictions on German industry, including limitations on engine production and exports. Inflation soared, the German economy collapsed, and ordinary citizens could barely afford bread, let alone automobiles. Luxury cars became almost impossible to sell. Both Benz and Sieyes and DMG faced near bankruptcy in the early 1920s. Plants were underutilized, and international markets were closed to German products due to both sanctions and lingering resentment. What had once seemed like the dawn of a glorious industry now looked like a dead end. Financial desperation and redundancy. The post-war years saw both companies scrambling for survival. Benz and Sieyes, still based in Mannheim, attempted to modernize its lineup with smaller, more affordable vehicles, but sales remained weak. DMG in Stuttgart faced similar struggles, relying heavily on its prestige and the Mercedes name, but unable to produce in high enough volumes to offset costs. By 1923, Germany's hyperinflation crisis rendered the situation desperate. Workers were being paid with wheelbarrows of nearly worthless currency, and basic supplies were scarce. Maintaining skilled labor and keeping factories open required extraordinary measures. It was clear to both management teams operating separately in such dire times was no longer sustainable, though once bitter rivals Benz and Kita and DMG had no choice but to consider a union. The push toward merger talks between the two companies began in the mid-1920s. Initially, there was resistance. Pride ran deep, especially at Benz and Sieyes, which still held the honor of Karl Benz's invention. But necessity trumped ego. Investors and industrial leaders saw that pooling resources, sharing technology, and consolidating factories would be the only way to survive Germany's shattered economy. In 1926, after protracted negotiations, Benz and Kai and DMG officially merged to form Mercedes-Benz. The name honored both legacies. Mercedes, the brand that had brought DMG international fame, and Benz, the man who had created the automobile itself. The new company adopted the now iconic three-pointed star as its emblem, symbolizing Daimler's original dream of powering vehicles on land, sea, and air. With the merger complete, Mercedes-Benz emerged as Germany's flagship automaker, stronger, more unified, and ready to rebuild. The legacy of struggle. The struggles of these early decades were not wasted. They forged a corporate culture rooted in resilience, precision, and adaptability. Mercedes-Benz learned to weather storms by focusing on engineering excellence, careful branding, and long-term vision. World War I, financial collapse, and industrial rivalry had nearly destroyed both companies. Yet from the ashes rose a stronger entity, one that would go on to redefine not just luxury automobiles, but the very identity of German engineering. Still, the story of struggle was far from over. The next great crisis, World War II, would once again test Mercedes-Benz's survival, reshaping its factories, its workforce, and its legacy in ways that remain controversial to this day. But before that, in the interwar years, the company would deliver one of its most important breakthroughs, a car that didn't just symbolize recovery, but established Mercedes-Benz as a global leader in automotive design. By 1926, the newly merged Mercedes-Benz carried the weight of two great legacies, but also the burden of survival. The German economy was fragile. the automobile market volatile, and international trust in German industry still tainted by the Great War. If the company was to endure, it needed more than survival. It needed a car that would restore faith, one that would prove to the world that Germany's engineering brilliance could rise from the ruins. That car arrived in the form of a machine so advanced, so elegant, and so powerful that it would forever change the company ES trajectory. The Mercedes-Benz SSK and its racing relatives of the late 1920s and 1930s. Rebuilding after the merger. The merger of Benz and Key and DMG in 1926 was not a smooth blending of two giants. It was an uneasy marriage of necessity. Factories had to be streamlined, management structures aligned, and overlapping models consolidated. Workers from Mannheim and Stuttgart, once rivals, were now colleagues under the new banner. But amid this reorganization, the new leadership knew one truth. Mercedes-Benz needed a statement car. It needed a model that would grab headlines, inspire buyers, and define what the three-pointed star stood for. The birth of the Super Mercedes. The answer came from none other than Ferdinand Porsche, who joined Daimler Motorengesellschaft in the early 1920s as chief engineer before the official merger. Porsche was a visionary, obsessed with performance and power. His task was clear: design a vehicle that was not just reliable but breathtaking. The result was the Mercedes-Benz S-Series, the S Sport, SS Super Sport, and eventually the legendary SSK Super Sport Kurz, or Short. These cars were not everyday vehicles for the masses. They were technological marvels built for the wealthy elite and for the racetrack. With supercharged inline-six engines producing upwards of 200 horsepower, these machines were among the most powerful cars of their era. The supercharger, engaged by pressing the accelerator pedal to the floor, unleashed a surge of power accompanied by a distinctive mechanical howl, a sound that became the calling card of Mercedes' performance. The design was equally stunning. Long hoods, sweeping fenders, and a commanding stance gave these models a presence unlike anything else on the road. They were at once elegant touring cars and ferocious racing machines. The SSK and racing dominance of the series, the SSK became the most iconic. Introduced in 1928, it was the shortened, lighter, and more agile version of its predecessors. With a top speed of around 120 miles per hour, an astonishing figure for the time, the SSK was among the fastest cars in the world. Behind the wheel of the SSK, Mercedes-Benz dominated racing events across Europe. Legendary drivers like Rudolf Caracciola piloted the car to victory in hill climbs and endurance races. Caracciola, nicknamed the Rainmaster for his uncanny ability to win in wet conditions, became synonymous with Mercedes' racing supremacy. Victories at events like the Mille Miglia, the Tourist Trophy, and countless Grand Prix races put Mercedes-Benz back on the map. These wins were more than trophies. They were advertisements broadcast across the globe, declaring that German engineering was back and stronger than ever. The SSK wasn't just a car, it was a cultural statement. It symbolized speed, luxury, and prestige. It proved that Mercedes-Benz could not only compete but dominate in the most demanding arenas. Economic challenges remain. While the SSK and its siblings earned glory, the company still faced economic headwinds. Germany in the late 1920s was entering a fragile recovery, but the Great Depression of 1929 would soon devastate global markets. For many automakers, the crash meant bankruptcy. Mercedes-Benz survived largely thanks to its diversified lineup. Alongside its racing machines, the company offered more practical vehicles, such as the Mercedes-Benz 170, introduced in 1931. This car, far less glamorous than the SSK, was crucial. It was affordable for middle-class buyers, reliable, and became one of the company's first real volume cars. The 170 proved that Mercedes-Benz could adapt, balancing luxury and prestige with practicality. It was a model that kept production lines moving and workers employed during lean years, ensuring that the company weathered the Depression better than many rivals. A reputation for innovation. The early 1930s also saw Mercedes-Benz push boundaries in safety and engineering. The Mercedes-Benz 170Phi, introduced later in the decade, pioneered the use of crumple zones, a concept far ahead of its time. These innovations reinforced the brand's image as not only powerful, but also scientifically advanced and forward-thinking. Meanwhile, the luxury models, the 500K and 540K, captured the imaginations of the wealthy elite. These cars, with their flowing Art Deco lines and supercharged engines, were symbols of opulence. They graced the driveways of aristocrats, industrialists, and even Hollywood stars, further cementing the Mercedes-Benz reputation worldwide. Racing and the Silver Arrows. Perhaps the most dramatic breakthrough of the 1930s came in motorsport with the rise of the Silver Arrows. In 1934, Mercedes-Benz introduced sleek, unpainted, aluminum-bodied race cars to Grand Prix competition. According to legend, the cars were painted silver only because engineers had to scrape off white paint to meet weight limits. Whether myth or fact, the Silver Arrows became legends on the track. With drivers like Rudolf Caracciola, Manfred von Brauchitsch, and Hermann Lang, Mercedes-Benz dominated racing throughout the decade, setting speed records and winning championships. These victories weren't just sporting triumphs, they were propaganda tools for a Germany eager to showcase its technological prowess on the world stage. Shadows of politics. In the 1930s, the rise of Nazi Germany created a complicated chapter for Mercedes-Benz. Like many German companies, Mercedes became linked to the government's agenda. The Nazi regime supported motorsport to showcase national pride, investing heavily in Mercedes' racing program. The famous Silver Arrows cars were celebrated worldwide for their engineering brilliance. But they also carried political weight, used as symbols of power and propaganda. This moment in history shows how innovation and politics became intertwined, leaving a legacy that is both impressive and controversial. The breakthrough. Defined. Despite these complexities, the late 1920s and 1930s marked Mercedes-Benz's definitive breakthrough. The SSK, the Silver Arrows, and the company's blend of luxury and practical models created a brand identity that was unmistakable: power, prestige, and innovation. The three-pointed star now shone brightly across Europe and beyond. Mercedes-Benz was no longer fighting for survival. It had become a leader, a brand synonymous with excellence. Yet even as the company basked in glory, storm clouds gathered once more. The Second World War loomed, and Mercedes-Benz would again find itself pulled into the service of conflict, facing both triumph and tragedy in equal measure. The story of Mercedes-Benz is one of survival, resilience, and constant reinvention. Having cemented its reputation in the 1930s with racing triumphs and iconic luxury models, the company was once again thrust into darkness with the outbreak of World War II. Factories were repurposed for military production, workers were drawn into the war effort, and like much of Germany's industry, Mercedes-Benz became entangled in the machinery of conflict. But out of devastation came rebirth. The post-war decades transformed Mercedes-Benz from a European automaker into a global symbol of quality, safety, and prestige. This era, spanning the late 1940s through the 1970s, was the crucible in which the brand achieved worldwide recognition. Wartime shadows. When World War II erupted in 1939, Mercedes-Benz, like nearly all major German companies, was co-opted into producing vehicles and engines for the German military. Factories in Stuttgart, Mannheim, and elsewhere were turned over to build trucks, aircraft engines, and armored vehicles. The war years left scars that still shape the company's history. Mercedes-Benz employed forced labor, including prisoners of war and concentration camp inmates, a grim reality that tarnished its legacy. In later decades, the company would acknowledge this past and contribute to reparations. But at the time, survival under a totalitarian regime left little room for corporate independence. By 1945, Allied bombing had devastated Mercedes-Benz facilities. Factories lay in ruins, equipment was destroyed, and the German economy itself had collapsed. It seemed unlikely that Mercedes-Benz, or even the German automotive industry, could recover. Rebuilding? After ruin. The late 1940s marked the most fragile period in Mercedes-Benz history. Yet against the odds, the company rebuilt. Step by step, the ruins of Stuttgart and Mannheim came back to life. Skilled workers, many of them returning from war, restarted assembly lines with whatever resources they could gather. The first post-war models were modest. In 1946, Mercedes-Benz introduced the 170V, a continuation of a pre-war design. It was a practical, durable car that served as a taxi, a delivery vehicle, and a family sedan. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what Germany needed: reliable transportation for a nation in recovery. Slowly, production volumes increased. By the early 1950s, Mercedes-Benz was exporting cars again, re-establishing its reputation beyond Germany's borders. The name carried weight, not just because of engineering, but because Mercedes-Benz had become a survivor, a brand reborn from ashes. The return of luxury, the 300 Adenauer. As Germany stabilized under the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle, Mercedes-Benz returned to its luxury roots. In 1951, the company unveiled the Mercedes-Benz 300, a stately sedan that became the flagship of the brand. Nicknamed the Adenauer after German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, who used it as his official car, the 300 symbolized the return of German prestige. It was powerful, elegant, and filled with advanced features for its time. To drive or be driven in a Mercedes-Benz 300 was to make a statement. German engineering was back on the world stage. The Adenauer marked the beginning of a new chapter. Mercedes-Benz was no longer merely recovering, it was redefining itself as the benchmark of luxury. The birth of legends. 300 SL Gullwing. If one car announced Mercedes-Benz's post-war revival to the world, it was the 1954 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. Originally developed as a racing machine, the 300 SL road car stunned audiences at the New York International Motor Show. With its distinctive upward-opening doors, advanced fuel-injected straight-six engine, and lightweight construction, it was unlike anything else on the road. Capable of speeds over 160 miles per hour, the 300 SL became the fastest production car of its era. More than a technological marvel, it was a cultural icon. Hollywood stars, athletes, and aristocrats clamored to own one. The Gullwing cemented Mercedes-Benz not only as an automaker, but as a dream maker. To this day, the 300 SL is celebrated as one of the most beautiful and significant cars ever built. It was proof that Mercedes-Benz could blend cutting-edge performance with timeless elegance. Innovation as identity. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Mercedes-Benz became synonymous with innovation. Safety, in particular, became a hallmark. In 1959, the company introduced the crumple zone, a revolutionary design that absorbed crash energy to protect passengers. This innovation, pioneered by Mercedes engineer Bela Baregni, set a new global standard for automotive safety. Other advancements followed: disc brakes, anti-lock braking systems, ABS, fuel injection, and advanced suspension designs. Each innovation wasn't just a technical achievement, it reinforced the brand's identity as a pioneer. Mercedes-Benz wasn't just building cars, it was shaping the future of mobility. Expansion. Across the globe. By the 1960s, Mercedes-Benz had established itself as a truly global brand. Exports to the United States, the Middle East, and Asia surged. In America, Mercedes became the choice of doctors, lawyers, and executives, professionals who wanted a car that reflected success, but also refinement. In the Middle East, Mercedes-Benz vehicles became symbols of wealth and power, from sedans to rugged trucks adapted for desert terrain. In Asia, growing economies embraced the prestige of German luxury. Factories and assembly plants expanded worldwide, ensuring Mercedes-Benz was not just a German company, but a global enterprise. The three-pointed star became one of the most recognized emblems in the world, as familiar in Los Angeles as in Stuttgart. The S-Class emerges. In 1972, Mercedes-Benz officially launched a model line that would become its most enduring symbol of excellence, the S-Class, short for Sonderklasse or Special Class. Though luxury sedans had long been part of the lineup, the S-Class formalized Mercedes's flagship philosophy, the most advanced engineering, safety, and comfort in one package. The W116 S-Class, the first to carry the name, embodied everything Mercedes-Benz stood for. It introduced innovations like anti-lock brakes, advanced climate control, and groundbreaking crash safety features. Each generation of the S-Class set benchmarks for the entire automotive industry. To own one was to declare not only wealth, but also discernment. The S-Class became the car of presidents, diplomats, celebrities, and business titans. It was, and remains, the gold standard of luxury sedans. Motorsports and prestige Mercedes-Benz also returned to motorsport, though cautiously. After a dominant yet controversial run in the 1930s, the company resumed racing in the 1950s with spectacular results. The Mercedes-Benz B196 Formula One car, piloted by Juan Manuel Fangio, captured world championships in 1954 and 1955. The sleek, Silver Arrow design once again proved Mercedes' engineering superiority. However, tragedy struck at the 1955 Le Mans disaster when a Mercedes 300 SLR crashed, killing over 80 spectators. Deeply shaken, Mercedes-Benz withdrew from motorsport for decades, focusing instead on production cars. The decision reflected the brand's sober, safety-first identity, recognition, and respect. By the 1970s, Mercedes-Benz was no longer just a German automaker. It was the global standard-bearer of luxury and safety. From taxis in Africa that ran for 500,000 miles to S-Class sedans chauffeuring heads of state, Mercedes vehicles proved their versatility, durability, and prestige. The company had endured wars, crises, and political entanglements. It had risen from rubble to dominate global markets. The three-pointed star now shown on every continent, a universal symbol of engineering excellence. But the story didn't end there. In the decades to come, Mercedes-Benz would push boundaries with some of its most legendary models, cars that didn't just represent engineering, but became cultural icons. By the 1970s, Mercedes-Benz had already secured its place as the global benchmark of luxury, safety, and engineering. Yet the company's history is not only about refinement and corporate growth. It is also about legendary cars that shook the automotive world. Machines that became cultural icons, technological marvels, and symbols of status, speed, and style. These cars didn't just define Mercedes-Benz, they helped define eras of motoring history itself. The Gullwing legacy lives on, 300 SL, 1954-1963. Although introduced in the 1950s, the 300 SL Gullwing remained a legend well into the following decades. Its iconic doors, fuel-injected engine, and lightweight frame made it a marvel of design and technology. Collectors revered it and celebrities flaunted it. But more than a fashion statement, the Gullwing set the stage for every sports car Mercedes would ever produce. It proved that Mercedes-Benz was not just about sedans and limousines. It could build a world-class sports machine that rivaled Ferrari, Jaguar, and Porsche. Even decades later, its influence could be seen in successors like the SLS AMG, which revived the Gullwing doors in the 2010s, paying homage to the car that had forever linked Mercedes-Benz with performance elegance, the 600 Grosser, the car of dictators and rock stars. Few cars embodied both prestige and controversy, like the Mercedes-Benz 600, introduced in 1963. Known as the grosser Mercedes, it was a rolling palace on wheels. With its 6.3-liter V8 engine, advanced hydraulics for windows and seats, and unmatched interior comfort, it was the ultimate luxury limousine of its day. The 600 became the car of choice for politicians, monarchs, and celebrities. From John Lennon to Elvis Presley, from the Pope to Hollywood elites, everyone who wanted to make a statement chose the 600. Yet its clientele also included dictators like Idi Amin, Kim Il-sung, and Nicolae Ceausescu, earning it a notorious reputation as the dictator's car. Love it or hate it, the 600 was a cultural phenomenon. Its presence was so commanding that it became shorthand for absolute power and wealth. The W123, the people's Mercedes. While the 600 dominated the world of the elite, the Mercedes-Benz W123, introduced in 1976, captured the hearts of everyday drivers. Reliable, durable, and timelessly designed, the W123 became one of the most beloved Mercedes models ever built. Taxi fleets across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East embraced it for its near-indestructible nature. Many W123s logged over 500,000 miles, earning the car a legendary reputation for longevity. Owners joked that the W123 would outlive its driver, and in many cases it nearly did. The W123 proved that a Mercedes-Benz wasn't just for kings and celebrities. It was for working people who valued quality. It was a different kind of legend, not flashy, not revolutionary, but enduring. The W126 S-Class, redefining luxury in the 1980s. In 1979, Mercedes-Benz introduced the W126 S-Class, which became the archetype of the modern luxury sedan. Sleek, aerodynamic, and packed with innovations such as airbags and advanced safety systems, the W126 became the car of CEOs, world leaders, and anyone who wanted the finest sedan on earth. It was also a pop culture staple. Appearing in movies, music videos, and TV shows, the W126 symbolized success in the 1980s. From Wall Street executives to Hollywood stars, owning an S-Class was the ultimate badge of arrival. The W126 wasn't just a car, it was a rolling declaration of wealth and taste. And like the W123, it proved virtually indestructible, with many examples still on the road decades later. The 190e 2.316, Mercedes versus BMW. In the 1980s, Mercedes-Benz took an unexpected turn into the world of compact performance sedans with the 190e 2.316. Developed with input from British engineering firm Cosworth, this car was Mercedes's answer to BMW's emerging dominance in the sport sedan market. With its high-revving engine, aerodynamic body kit, and motorsport pedigree, the 190e 2.316 shocked skeptics by becoming a serious competitor on track and street. Ayrton Senna, before his Formula One fame, drove a 190e in a now legendary race at the Nürburgring, further boosting its reputation. The 190e showed that Mercedes could play in the same league as BMW's M cars, and it paved the way for the AMG models that would later dominate the performance luxury segment. The AMG revolution. From tuners to titans. By the late 20th century, Mercedes-Benz's relationship with AMG transformed its brand image. Originally an independent tuning company founded by former Mercedes engineers, AMG specialized in turning sedate Mercedes sedans into roaring beasts. Cars like the AMG Hammer, a modified Mercedes E-Class with a massive V8 capable of outrunning Lamborghinis, shocked the automotive world. By the 1990s, Mercedes officially partnered with AMG, and the performance division became synonymous with outrageous power wrapped in refined luxury. The AMG ethos turned Mercedes from a brand of conservative luxury into one capable of wild, tire-shredding performance, appealing to a younger, more aggressive clientele. The G-Class. From military rig to cultural icon. Perhaps no Mercedes has had a more unlikely journey to legend status than the Mercedes-Benz G-Class. Originally developed in the 1970s as a military off-roader, the boxy, rugged G-Wagon became a civilian favorite thanks to its durability and unique design. By the 1990s and 2000s, the G-Wagon had transformed into a status symbol, beloved by celebrities, rappers, and adventurers alike. Its blend of military toughness and luxury interiors made it one of the most recognizable SUVs in the world. Despite its age-old design, the G-Class remains a bestseller even today, proof that sometimes the craziest ideas, like turning a military truck into a luxury icon, become the most enduring legends. The SLR McLaren and beyond, supercar dreams. In the 2000s, Mercedes-Benz teamed up with McLaren to create the SLR McLaren, a carbon fiber supercar with Formula One-inspired technology. With a supercharged V8 and futuristic styling, the SLR pushed Mercedes into the supercar realm. Later, models like the SLS AMG and the AMG GT continued this tradition, cementing Mercedes-Benz as a player in the high-performance sports car arena. These models weren't just about speed, they were about image. They reminded the world that Mercedes-Benz could still shock and inspire. Legends that define a legacy. From the 300 SL Gullwing to the 600 Grosser, from the rugged W123 taxis to the G-Class and AMG monsters, Mercedes-Benz has created cars that became more than machines. They became cultural touchstones, reflections of power, wealth, rebellion, and aspiration. These models represent the craziest side of Mercedes-Benz, not because they were reckless, but because they dared to redefine what a car could be. Each one told the world, this is what happens when engineering excellence meets audacity. But behind the legends lies a deeper story. That of a company constantly evolving, constantly adapting, and constantly aiming for perfection. And as the brand looked toward the future, it prepared for new challenges: electrification, globalization, and the weight of living up to a century-old legacy. When Karl Benz ignited his primitive patent motorwagon in 1886, he could not have known he was lighting a flame that would transform the world. That sputtering contraption, little more than a wooden frame, 3 wheels, and a single-cylinder engine, was the spark that birthed the modern automobile. At the same time, Gottlieb Daimler's relentless pursuit of a high-speed internal combustion engine laid the foundation for the very heartbeat of mobility. Together, though working apart, these men began a revolution. And when their companies merged decades later, that revolution crystallized into one of the most enduring names in history, Mercedes-Benz, a legacy of firsts. Mercedes-Benz has always been more than just a car manufacturer. It has been a pioneer of progress, often decades ahead of its time. From Bertha Benz's daring journey that proved the car's practicality to the introduction of safety features like crumple zones, ABS, and airbags, Mercedes didn't just follow trends, it created them. Every S-Class became a time capsule of the future, each generation brimming with innovations that would trickle down to the entire industry. The three-pointed star was not simply a badge, it was a promise that what lay beneath it was the most advanced car of its era. The soul of innovation. What makes Mercedes-Benz unique is its ability to balance opposites. It has built machines of uncompromising luxury, the Grosser 600, the Maybachs, the S-Class limousines, that transported kings and leaders. Yet it has also built indestructible workhorses like the W123 that served as taxis for ordinary families. It engineered racing legends like the Silver Arrows and AMG beasts that conquered Formula One and Le Mans, yet also crafted gentle icons like the G-Class, which transitioned from military tool to red carpet superstar. Mercedes-Benz has lived in these dualities: refinement and power, exclusivity and accessibility, tradition and innovation. That balance has allowed it to transcend being just a brand. It has become a cultural symbol, representing ambition, status, and the pursuit of perfection. Scars of history, strength of survival. No legacy of Mercedes-Benz can be told without acknowledging the shadows of history. The company survived 2 world wars, economic collapse, and the destruction of German industry. It was tested in ways few corporations ever endure. Factories lay in ruins, reputations were questioned, and yet, from the rubble, Mercedes rose again, rebuilt, re-engineered, and redefined. That resilience, that refusal to disappear, became part of its DNA. Mercedes-Benz is not merely a story of success, it is a story of survival through fire. And that survival imbues every car it makes with a sense of permanence, a reminder that this is a company forged through struggle as much as triumph. Cars as cultural icons. For some, Mercedes-Benz is the S-Class, a quiet, gliding limousine that symbolizes achievement. For others, it is the 300 SL Gullwing, with its dramatic doors and racing soul. For many, it's the G-Class, standing tall on city streets or mountain trails, its shape unchanged yet timeless. And for enthusiasts, it's the growl of an AMG engine, defying the stereotype that Mercedes is only about comfort. Each model has etched itself into culture, appearing in films, songs, political parades, and family photo albums. Mercedes-Benz cars are not background objects. They are characters in the story of the 20th and 21st centuries. Toward the future. As the world shifts toward electrification, automation, and sustainability, Mercedes-Benz faces new challenges. The company that invented the automobile must now reinvent it. With the EQ series of electric cars and advanced autonomous driving systems, Mercedes seeks to redefine luxury and performance for a new era. The 3-pointed star still points to land, sea, and air, but its modern meaning stretches further, toward digital frontiers, clean energy, and an automotive landscape where the car is not just transport, but an intelligent companion. The same pioneering spirit that pushed Karl Benz to bolt together his first motor wagon now drives engineers to imagine a world where cars emit no pollution, drive themselves safely, and yet still carry the soul of performance and elegance that defines the brand. The cinematic ending. From cobblestone streets in 19th-century Mannheim to the neon-lit skylines of New York, Dubai, and Tokyo, Mercedes-Benz has traveled far beyond its German roots. It is a global symbol, at once a machine, a status, and a dream. When we look at a Mercedes, we are not just looking at a car, we are looking at history on wheels, the birth of mobility, the survival of industry through war and ruin, the triumphs of racing legends, the refinement of luxury, the spirit of innovation. Mercedes-Benz is not just the inventor of the automobile, it is the storyteller of the automobile, writing chapter after chapter, decade after decade on highways, racetracks, and city boulevards across the world. And as long as the 3-pointed star shines, its light will carry a promise that the future of the automobile will always bear the imprint of its creators. This is the legacy of Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler. This is the saga of Mercedes-Benz, the inventors of the car, the guardians of progress, and the eternal star of the road.